Record. Right. My name is Mike Cook, and I'm a member of the Bedfordshire Progressive Schule in the UK. I'd like to introduce Johnny Daniels. Johnny is British by birth, born like me in London, I believe. He now lives in Israel with his wife and two daughters, if I've got that right. Many of us will be familiar with the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and you may even have visited the Avenue of the Righteous Gentiles, which immortalizes those that risk their own lives, helping us and saving lives during the dark days of the Holocaust. Some of those heroes, they're still alive today, but I'll leave it to Johnny to explain the role that he's created and how his charity from the depths fulfills this role. I have to say, Johnny, before I say anything else, that I've been following you with interest and fascination for some time now. What an incredible mensch you are. I know you're a modest man, but I'm very privileged, I have to say, that you've agreed to do this interview, because you must lead a very busy life, I'm sure. And you're in Miami at the moment. Please let us know when was From the Depths formed, how it got this name, where did you get your inspiration from, etc., etc.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Yeah, I arrived here in the United States yesterday. I'll be here for around about a month, actually, in North America, also all over Canada, visiting some of the Holocaust survivors out here with another of our projects connected to the Torah that was hidden during the Holocaust and partially destroyed and now being rewritten by survivors. From the Depths was created 10 years ago. As you mentioned, I was born and raised in London. My great-grandfather survived the Holocaust, was saved because he was able to escape and come to the UK. His entire family, my entire family, were killed in a small village in northern Poland called Dobrze nad Wisłą. And I kind of grew up with that knowledge and grew up as well surrounded by Holocaust survivors. It was something that a lot of us would have remembered, seeing the numbers on the arms or people talking about it, opportunities in school to hear from survivors.
School teachers with numbers on the arm,
yeah. And this was something that even in my generation was something that was just part of, it was normal. It was normal that we would have survivors come and visit us, that they would speak to us, that would have an opportunity to hear from their stories. And when my eldest daughter was born, we named her after her great-grandmother from my ex's side, who was a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau and passed away just before she was born. And I started to realize and really think to myself that this opportunity that we've had, that this impact that survivors have had in our lives, won't go onto the generation that comes after us. Every single step of my life was somehow influenced by a meeting with a survivor, whether it was literally the Shabbat before I was meant to join the Israeli army. I'd come back to London to be with my family. Just outside of Shaw, I ended up seeing this old man standing there holding a piece of paper, and it was his address, and he was a bit confused, and he said, point me in the right direction. And I said, oh, don't be silly, I'll walk you home. And up walking home, the most remarkable man who had a limp because he was taken by Mengele along with his twin brother and experimented on. He and his brother survived the experimentation by Mengele, ended up at the end of the war attempting to go back to their village. There was nowhere there. They had nowhere to go. They were all alone, and they went to Israel. And he told me that his brother ended up dying in the Battle of Latrun, in the War of Independence for the State of Israel. And just that encounter with this gentleman, literally the week before I was to join the army, also changed my personal experience in the army. I ended up going into a much more combative unit in the paratroopers, and it gave me a lot of mental strength that was entirely necessary. And truly, every single element of my life was somehow impacted by a survivor. And then I started to look at my daughter, my eldest, and realized that more needed to be done from our generation to really step up and make sure that their stories are told. And this is the main reason why I created the foundation initially, was to look at what we can do in terms of educating on the Holocaust, and making sure a younger generation gets involved, because we aren't. It's as simple as that. Incredible work has been done in terms of Holocaust education and memory memorial. However, a huge amount of it has been very academic, which is obviously important.
Yeah.
But that academic work doesn't necessarily touch a generation who are growing up with TikTok and Instagram and social media. It doesn't, really hit a generation whose idols are not poets and writers, rather sports stars and others. And this was kind of the approach, to look at how we deal with it from that perspective. And, thank God we've been successful. We've been working very, very hard to make sure that we really keep that line and push in that direction. And then eventually what ended up happening was, a lot of the work that we'd done on ground in Eastern Europe, we'd often invite righteous amongst the nations to join us, because they were there at events and people were coming and visiting them. And after, I think, the second or third event, I started to realize that they were coming in all different ways. There was one incredible man who sadly passed away last year, Joseph Wawaszczak, who was honored by Yad Vashem for saving 54 Jews. Roman Polanski even said about him that if he didn't make the film The Pianist, he would have made the story of his life. And the most incredible man. And at over 100 years old, he was coming to the events, taking multiple buses, trams, walking. And that's not right. We were offering him, we'd say, take a taxi, we'll pay you back. But he didn't feel, he felt a bit ashamed, perhaps. And so then, probably 5 years ago now, we inaugurated our first program, actually in partnership. We had a partnership back then with the Foreign Office of the British government, Chelsea Football Club, and a few other organizations. And we brought a small fleet of British taxis, of black cabs, of, Hackney carriages.
I think that's when I started watching you, because it seemed so unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of, the thought was, okay, we need to do something to help them. Quite a lot of them have mobility issues, so a regular vehicle isn't going to be easily accessible to a lot of them. And I was in London at my grandma's, and we were in Edgware, and we kind of gone for a walk with my daughters and dog on Shabbat, and I'd seen this guy around the corner, a fleet of taxis outside his house. So I was just looking at them, thinking, my grandfather, my father's side, was a cabbie, and I was showing the girls, and then ended up in conversation somehow with the guy who owns them. One thing to another, turns out he's Jewish, and they get decommissioned.
Surprise, in Edgware with taxis. Yeah.
In Edgware with a fleet of taxis, exactly. And so we end up, after, I think, 12 or 13 years, they're decommissioned. They can't drive on the road in London anymore. A lot of them in good condition, so we were able to get them donated to us. I personally drove every single one of them, all 4 of them, out to Poland. That's quite a long drive, but we did it.
I know, because I've done it. Yes.
Yeah, it's a schlep. Imagine doing it 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
My dad helped me a bit as well, and then we were able eventually to get the taxis out when it started, and it completely changed the lives of these last living heroes. Back then, about 5 years ago, there were close to maybe 500 righteous still alive, and that's when I started to realize that beyond clearly these are heroes of the Jewish people, of humanity. These are people who risk their lives to save our brothers and sisters. And slowly, when you start speaking to them, you understand that it isn't just, it's an easy thing to say they risk their lives. But, suddenly you're sitting with Helena Kuzimierz in Lublin, this beautiful older lady. And Helena starts, it shows me pictures of her uncle and aunt. Normal, everyone shows lots of pictures. And she said, oh, they were killed. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, well, what happened? She said, well, they were caught hiding Jews. Yeah. So her uncle and aunt were murdered for hiding Jews. And her and her parents carried on regardless, hiding other Jews. They understood very well the risk, but they decided that they were going to do what's right. And even now, all these years later, you sort of expect that these people would be treated like absolute heroes. They were honored by the state of Israel and Yad Vashem. They're given a little bit of money here and there. But what I found more often than not was, when visiting them, They truly didn't have what they needed. So that's when, you know, I decided that I was going to step up and support them. And then when COVID hit, I flew out right at the beginning. I left Israel and I went to Poland thinking I'd be there maybe for a month or two. Ended up stuck for over a year and a half. And during that year and a half, I visited 24 countries. I visited almost every single living righteous personally, multiple times. And every time would be taking things that were necessary for them to be at home, to be safe, to be taken care of.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a battle. I mean, that was pretty incredible, you know, driving everywhere from Ukraine to Belarus to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Hungary, Germany. And the experience was truly formidable.
And all in a right-hand drive London taxi.
No, that drive I did in a different car.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. That I wasn't going to do in a taxi.
Right.
That was easier to do in a different car, but we went and visited every single one of them and made sure that they had everything they need. And only when you sit with them do you start to truly understand what things they could really use extra help with. And then, you know, then Christmas came about during COVID, and you know, that was also a very difficult but also a very special time. I rented a van. I went and got people and friends and companies to donate product. Created these massive Christmas hampers. I went and bought a couple of 100 Christmas trees as well, which is it's an unusual thing for a Jewish boy to do. And it was even more, it's surprisingly difficult dealing with Christmas trees. They're horrible things to attempt to pick up and
you have no experience of doing that before.
None. I mean, I went to the farm where they had the Christmas trees, and you know, I started to go and put them on the van, and I grabbed the tree.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, "What are you doing?" And and I got all the needles in my hand.
Right.
You know, he's like, looked at me and says,
We've
"How
never
did you
had
not
them.
know
We
that?"
don't know. We've seen them, but we don't know what they are to touch or to handle.
No idea. But handing them out and delivering these trees along with these hampers was a really important experience. And it was important because it gave me an opportunity to truly give back. And honestly, it felt like, you know, perhaps for the first time, truly, we've been able to help save those who saved us.
Yeah.
And when the war started in Ukraine, I've been in Ukraine 6 times throughout the war already. Coming back from Poland, I'll be going.
I didn't know it was as many times as that.
Yeah, I've been into Ukraine 6 times and really all over the country. In just over a month, I'll be going back in, this time towards Odessa. Right. There are 11 righteous amongst the nations who still live in Ukraine. As soon as the war hit, we offered every single one of them to leave. We helped one family escape who wanted to. The rest decided to stay. You know, which is understandable. They're old. Yeah. You know, how are they going to start a new life somewhere else? You know, they want to stay with their families who are unable to leave.
Of course.
But there, it becomes also very tricky in terms of bringing them what they really need. Initially, when the war started, the medication was a huge problem. We were able to get them that and source that for them. Then turned into things like adult diapers, which is something that's often overlooked and not thought about, but incredibly important to somebody's dignity when they get older. So we brought in hundreds of wheelchairs and diapers and all different things, and that was for the righteous and also for Holocaust survivors and truly anybody who needed. And that became a very sort of big focus of the work. And sadly, over the last few years, obviously, you know, these are remarkable people who this is their last years. And it's been bittersweet. That I've been able to sort of at least give them that honor and love and respect in their lives. And
in a highly personalized way as well.
Absolutely. The point is visiting them. You know, for most of them, the visit is just as valuable as the gifts that you'll give. It's the fact that I'm sitting with them, I'm looking at them. You know, I've sat for hours and been spoken to in Hungarian. I don't understand a word.
I was going to ask, how many languages do you speak?
None really. I kind of muddle.
I thought you spoke Polish at least.
I speak a little Polish.
Okay.
I speak a little Russian.
Right.
And most of the other language, I have no idea what they're saying,
Right.
but it's not that important. It's just sit there and listen to them.
Yeah.
And, usually it's been amazing, especially with social media, I'll put online that I'm going somewhere.
Mhm.
And so many people reach out wanting to help out. So I take a local with, and,
Yeah.
you usually tell the local person, like, don't worry about translating, right? It's enough. I know the person's story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they just want to be heard, that and that's all. And so you sit there, ask a few questions, and ask them to tell you their story, and listen and look them in the eye and give them good energy and love, and that's all they really need. And that's been a remarkable experience, and something that I've been incredibly lucky to be able to do. Sadly now, there's only 105 righteous amongst the nations left, which
That's
is,
from 500 when you first started.
yeah, from just 5 years ago. The beginning of COVID, there was 380. Now just 105 left. Just a few days ago, I drove to Gdansk in northern Poland. I was in Warsaw, so it was like a 700-kilometer round trip.
Mhm.
I drove just to give Sophia, one of the righteous, flowers for her birthday,
Right.
and a letter from the Israeli embassy. And unfortunately, she's now bedridden, unable to eat. And I'm thankful that I was able to visit her enough in the past that I was able to listen to her story and hear from her. And this, unfortunately, was, sadly, most likely the last time I'll ever see her.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with a generation that is leaving us quickly, but their stories are so important. And honoring them, obviously, on one hand, and giving them love and credit and thanks from the Jewish community and myself is remarkable.
Which must mean more than getting a certificate from Yad Vashem and the gifts for someone to come to take the trouble to come to their house in Eastern Europe. That is a big thing. I think the most memorable one that stuck out with me, I can't remember the country, it may have been Belarus, where this elderly lady was living in the most appalling conditions without any sanitary conditions at all. And you managed to move her out into a modern flat, I believe.
Yeah, that was shocking. I was in a city called Babruisk in Belarus.
It was Belarus, yeah.
Yeah, and there was the I've been in touch with the local community. They said there was a righteous who lived in a small village nearby, and I mean, I'd never. It felt like going back in time. Like I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, I entered this lady's home, and it was winter. It was freezing cold, and I was dressed in like a thick coat, and I had gloves. It was snowing, and I entered her house, and unfortunately, I had to leave almost immediately. I had to run outside. I was wrenched. The stench was unbearable. And I was like, what on earth is this? Like, I'd never been so overwhelmed by, and the local is a Jewish girl, actually, who was helping me there from Bobruisk. She sort of pointed to the side, and I looked down and I saw a bucket full of human waste. I said, what? Why? She says, well, where else is she going to do it? I said, what do you mean? So there's no plumbing. I said, what? Huh? She has an outhouse, but it's too difficult for her to get outside to go to the outhouse. So unfortunately, she has to do it here, and someone comes once a week, once every 2 weeks, and throws it out.
Once every 2 weeks?
Whenever someone can. And first of all, you can become incredibly ill by the smell. And so what we were able to do there was actually raise enough money and help her get out. The same thing, actually, remarkably, one of the survivors who I'm come out here actually to see again in Miami is a man by the name of Aaron Bielski. So Aaron Bielski is one of the last living Bielski brothers. The Bielski brothers were the famous Jewish partisans who fought in the then Polish, now Belarusian city of Novogrodok. A very famous movie made about them with Daniel Craig and Leif Schreiber and others. The largest group of Jewish partisans during the war, the largest group of partisans actually who saved people, the most remarkable group of Jews. And the last living Bielski is alive here in Miami. He's in his late 90s. And I visited him last time. And remarkably, on that very trip, I went to Novogrodok. I wanted to visit the forest where the Jews were.
Yeah.
And so I started to speak to locals, and I said, is there anybody alive who still remembers? And they told me, in the movie it was kind of less, but the true story is the only reason they were able to help save so many people was because of the help of a local policeman, a guy by the name of Kozlovsky. And there were three brothers, the Kozlovsky brothers, and one of them was killed and one of them had a small daughter. The small daughter was never honored by anybody because she was a kid at the time. However,
Right.
being a child was also an incredibly difficult thing, because if you tell your friends, the pressure on the children was immense. And they told me Mrs. Kozlovska is still alive. And I visited her, and her situation was also tremendously hard. I mean, she lived basically in a wooden house and shut all the rooms down and lived in one room, and same thing there, was unable to leave her house. And there was no way she was going to leave or go anywhere. We were able to put a lot of pressure on the local municipality to make sure that she got a social worker to come in and visit. And so, there's a tremendous amount that just can't be done if you're not on ground. And kind of willing also to make a bit of a mess if necessary.
Quite.
Yeah, sometimes that's what's needed to be. But
there's also the logistics of this. I mean, apart from the humane contact that you're doing, it's all very easy to talk about it, but the logistics in a foreign country, and one that is not as rich as UK or USA, to get these done is quite an achievement to do this.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, generally dealing with any country within Europe is somewhat easier. Dealing with Belarus and Ukraine, especially Ukraine now, that was hard. I mean, one of the things that I very much felt when I was visiting with Mrs. Kozlovska was that she didn't even have. She was just sitting on her bed all day. Her radio was broken. She was just sitting there. And I went and I thought, well, I'll buy her a TV, right? At least we could watch something. I mean, I was the cost in Belarus of a tiny rubbish Chinese TV was maybe £300 or £400. It was a couple of years ago, like very expensive. Medication there, incredibly expensive. And in Ukraine as well now, thankfully, I've been entering with Israeli security personnel and have a lot of contacts, so we've been able to deal with stuff. But even there, the medication that you're buying, it's also as a foundation, it's tricky because
some of it might not be genuine.
No, I wasn't worried about that because I was getting it from pharmacists. The bigger problem was I couldn't get receipts for anything. So everything's in cash. And under and and that also actually got quite tricky, dealing with a lot of that stuff. But even there, I was in Truskovets, which is in the eastern part of Ukraine, and a center was set up by the Joint and a few other organizations where survivors were brought in, and an elderly gentleman came over to us, and he said, "Look," he said, "I'm not quite sure what to do. I heard that you can get medication." He was a Holocaust survivor. He'd started cancer treatment just before the war. And this was, I think, 4 or 5 months into the war at that point. And he stopped because he couldn't get the drugs. And, there was a market for it, but they were going more expensive at I think it was maybe $90 a month or something like that. And so immediately, I went and bought him medication for enough months and have been in touch since. And thankfully he has. But this has been a big part of it, and being able to be there on ground truly was a very powerful experience. Just even recalling over the last year the situations that we dealt with. At one point, we were working very closely from the depths with the Jewish Agency. So the Jewish survivors that were getting out were sort of put into different hotels all over Poland mainly, and from there processed and flown to Israel. And I was running between hotels, like everything from bottled water that, you know, it's something that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but
It's essential. Yeah.
people have escaped. They don't have a lot of money on them. Even if they do, water in hotels tends to be expensive, right?
Exactly, yes.
And you know, if you're running, you've got kids or an elderly person, you really careful with the cash that you have on hand. And in those situations, you know, it was buying thousands of bottles of water, and I'd come to make everything up, clothing, everything, and I'd come to one of the hotels and I'd sat there, and there was an elderly gentleman sitting there, a very tall man, quite well, like big built, and he looked quite sad. And I said, "What's his story?" This and the people from the Jewish agency said, "Well, we're not entirely sure because he doesn't speak much." And I just went and sat with him, and I kind of sat next to him and looked him in the eye, put my hands on him, and I said, "How are you?" And he burst out crying, and he told me that when the Second World War broke out, he was a young boy, and his family had run to the train station in Lvov after the Germans and Russians in 1941 started fighting against each other. He went towards Operation Barbarossa. He ran towards the train station in with his family, and they were in that train station, and he'd lost his family, and he ended up surviving by himself as a young boy, escaping in the train station. And he said, "I can't believe 80 years later, I'm running from the train station again."
Yeah.
And he'd gone to that very train station again. And
Oh,
thank God this time was able to get on a bus,
yeah.
eventually taken to Israel. And I looked down and I noticed that he was wearing flip-flops. And he said that, you know, his old and his feet are swollen, and he just ran with the flip-flops he had on him. He doesn't have shoes. And even there, thankfully, we were able to purchase some shoes. At the time, I was taking a van, I was renting a van and going to shops like Primark and basically wiping the whole shop out. I was buying the entire shop. They saw me coming, and workers were like running away, like petrified that they were going to be asked to help, because literally I was leaving Primark with thousands of items of clothing. Because this is also something that we noticed very quickly, that, you know, once again, you're seeing Jews escaping and others and rummaging through secondhand clothing. You know, whilst the intent of wanting to help and sending people's used clothes was a beautiful thing to do, especially nowadays, it just the image of it was so undignified,
Yeah.
and so unfair for these people, that, you know, it's not 1940s where, you know, you have to tailor textiles, right? You know, they're mass made cheap,
And yeah.
at least
And
give that
it's a
dignity.
dignity thing. Yeah.
So what we did was, within the different hotels with the Jewish agency, I set up boutique shops. We called them boutique shops, where we took the hotel room, and then we'd just have tons of items of clothing, and people were standing in queues outside, and they'd come in, they could try on what they wanted and just take it
Right.
completely for free. And, you know, at the beginning it was winter, so you had people running in winter boots. It was necessary for them to have lighter shoes. They were then going to Israel, you know, heavy, and t-shirts and all these different things.
Right. Yeah.
And thankfully it's been, I've been very, very lucky and very blessed that I've been able to be here at this junction in history,
Yeah.
to be able to sort of be, you know, a funnel to enable people to support those who really need it.
Well, you are a unique character, I think. I've just got a signal to say that we're running out of time because haven't got the pro version. But you are a unique character, Johnny. There's no one else like you. I've never seen anything like it before. And I will thank you very much for this interview. I'll call you back shortly privately because we haven't got time. But thank you very much indeed. And it was extremely interesting, and everybody's going to be very interested to hear and see this.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. I see that we do have, what is it, 9 minutes left, and so.
Oh, you know more than me because I
Yeah,
can't see
it says 9 minutes left. So I mean,
right.
the only thing that I would add within this is that, you know, clearly, you know, not everyone's going to be as crazy as me and sort of, you know, jump and travel around the world doing this kind of stuff. It's
you've got to make a profession of it, of your living, because otherwise, I mean, it has to be combined with giving you a living.
Yeah, that's on a personal level, that's not easy.
Yeah.
True. It's been very challenging. I've done PR I do PR for some companies at times as well, which enables me to sort of fund myself enough that I can then be on the road and do all of this. And it gets hard, and especially during COVID, and actually during the war was even more difficult because I truly didn't have time to concentrate on anything else. But somehow I'm able to sort of string it all together and be okay. I'm not. It's all right in the end.
It's a quest for you, and and I mean, it must be immensely fulfilling that you're doing this as well.
This is it. At the end of the day, I think the thing that's given me more strength than anything was I was brought up by an incredible family,
Yeah.
and especially my grandmother, who's definitely going to be watching this. She's an engineer. She'll be 100%. She's my number one fan. She'll tell me that the best one I've ever done. She doesn't understand why I'm not doing the news every day on BBC. But she and others gave me the feeling and the strength that everything is possible. And there's nothing that no one can't do. And I truly deeply believe that. And at the end of the day, especially after the month on the road visiting the righteous over Christmas and other times during the war, it's incredibly tiring. Incredible.
And in Eastern Europe, the snow and the weather and all that you've got to cope with as well.
It's coping with the weather, it's coping with the people, right? And there is anti-Semitism, there is difficulties, and it isn't always hard. And there's got to fundraise, and you've got to do all of this, and then you've got to meet people, and often it's not easy. Like I said, it's a lot of the time it's very nice and friendly, but other times it can get quite hard. Visiting someone old who's not in good shape.
And speaking a different language, but you have a team of volunteers to assist you.
People help everywhere, and that's kind of the incredible thing that I've been able to build around me. Is a remarkable group of people who help and volunteer. Non-Jews mainly, to be honest. Obviously Jews as well, but also that feeling and the feeling of fulfillment that I get makes, on a personal level, on a selfish level, makes this worth it. It's I go to sleep at the end of the day with an incredibly full heart, knowing that I've done what's right. And knowing that I've done best by others. And if that at least from my perspective is the life that's worth living. And that's what I've tried, and
there are not many people who can say that. Well, they might be able to say it for specific incidences in their life or times, but yours has been completely ongoing for years now, and you can say it.
And I'm deeply grateful that I'm able to do that. And again, it's not easy. It's a struggle, and it's hard, and it's difficult.
Sure.
But when you're able to at the end of the day, when your kids look at you and say that they're proud of you, and it's difficult on them as well. I'm not always there.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because you've got less time. You're not going home every evening to your family. You're in other countries all the time.
And the fact that my kids sort of have grown up like that, but also understand deeply. For my eldest daughter's, when it was her bat mitzvah, I held her a party in Poland, in addition to other places, and I held her a party there because I wanted the righteous to be part of her party. And I think maybe 10 righteous came to her bat mitzvah, and subsequently I told her, I said, Michali, I said, there's no one in the whole world who's done this before. Like, you're in a very unique position.
That mitzvah to remember. Yes.
For years to come. And I said, when your grandkids learn about COVID in school, they'll say, what did you do? And you say, well, I was at home, I was on the computer, I was stuck. I said, but my dad.
Yes.
And then you'll be able to be proud. And they get it. And it is a life worth living. It is. And it's an incredible thing to be able to do. And especially, again, I think the thing that I'd end with as well is that when going back to the righteous, there's not really a better way to educate a younger generation than through the stories of the righteous. What I've seen over and over again is that even taking people to places like concentration camps is a very heavy and difficult thing to do. It's a shocking thing, but what's the message? the message is obviously don't hate and don't kill people. Now, most people leaving a situation, a place like that, will say, well, I don't really hate anybody and I'm not going to kill anybody, right? It's not within me. However, when you bring up the stories of the righteous, then people stand differently, people look differently, people understand differently. And then the question comes of, well, am I doing what's right in the world today? Am I being a righteous today? You know, what more should I do? And I think that this is, you know, one of the tools that we've seen through the stories of the righteous, and sort of pushing with that. Again, you know, and I'll just end once again by thanking you so much for this interview. I do appreciate
Thank you, because everything is so positive with you as well. You put a positive spin on things that generally are negative.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Johnny. We're indebted to you. I'll finish it off and then I'm going to call you again without privately. Okay.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye for now. Bye-bye.